Welcome to everybody. My name is Miles Hansen. I'm the president and CEO of World Trade Center Utah. And welcome to our Life Science and Healthcare Innovation Breakout as part of our virtual trade mission to Israel. This is the fifth session that we've done over the past couple of days. The previous ones have been phenomenal. For those who have not had a chance to participate in those, just a very quick recap. On Monday morning, we did a doing business in Israel, a general overview of the market there, opportunities, effective ways of engaging. That was led by Consul General Hillel Newman, who is the Consul General of Israel based in Los Angeles. Right after that, we did a tech and innovation breakout session with Adiv Baruch. Adiv is one of the pioneers of Israel's tech ecosystem. He's started several companies, grown them into global tech companies. He now runs the largest fund of funds in Israel, and just a phenomenal resource and source of expertise. He gave an overview of the tech and innovation ecosystem and provided some insights for how Utah companies could engage. He's also offered to be a resource. And so we have a lot of innovators on with us this morning. I'd highly recommend you go and check that out. Reach out to us if you'd like to make some connections and see what we can do to help you get your foot in the door there in Israel. Yesterday morning, we had a defense and security session with Duran Beggar-Best Elan, who was the former top counterterrorism official for Israel. So someone with deep expertise. Israel is a country that takes its security very seriously due to the rough neighborhood that it lives in. And so he shared his perspective on how COVID is changing the security and defense industry and opportunities for Utah companies to engage. And we followed that up with a session on water technology with Danny Lacker, who is the head of water security for Israel. Utah and Israel share a lot of things in common, one of which is a scarcity of water. And Danny shared some of the ways that the companies could engage with their technologies here in Utah, in Israel to grow there, as well as ways that Israeli solutions may be applicable to us here in Utah. And now this morning, we're very grateful to be joined by Assaf Barnia, who is the managing director of Sonara Ventures, a healthcare innovation fund that's backed by Philips and Teva. And so great connections in the industry. Assaf is also the chair of the Life Science Advisory Board of the Israel Export Institute. And for those of us in Utah, point of interest, Assaf played for Seton Hall in 1991. Basketball player, they won the Big East Championship, they beat Georgetown, and then they made a run to the Elite Eight, playing in the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight round right here in Salt Lake City, Utah. And as we were talking, we compared notes, and I realized I was at those games up at Rice Stadium, and so others on the call today may have been as well. Assaf went back and played professional basketball in Israel, and then transitioned into the healthcare innovation industry. So Assaf, we're grateful to have you with us as well. We're also joined today with two Israeli companies that are doing really exciting things. My Home Doc CEO Alon Natanson, we'll have a chance to hear from, as well as AI Health, the CEO Zach DeVay Aaron. We'll have a chance to hear from him here in a little bit. One final reminder, we have one more session in our virtual trade mission that will start at 9:45 a.m. this morning. It's a business roundtable where we'll have a chance to meet with some Israeli companies who are interested in learning more about doing business here in Utah. We'll also have a chance to hear from the Israel Federation of Chambers of Commerce, so they can talk about ways that they can be helpful for Utah companies that want to engage in Israel. And we'll have a chance to hear from the BIRD Foundation, which is the Israel-U.S. Binational Industrial Research and Development Foundation. And this is a cool organization. To be honest, I had to Google it to learn about it myself. But it is an organization that provides funding to partnerships between U.S. and Israeli companies. So if a U.S. tech company and an Israeli tech company, if they get together, the BIRD Foundation can provide up to 50% of the cost of doing R&D and fine-tuning their products and services to help build these strong ties between the United States and Israel. So please go to our website, wtcutah.com, to register if any of that would be of interest to you. I'd like to recognize our partners in our virtual trade mission. With the Consulate General of Israel, we're joined this morning with Dr. Hillel Newman. Hillel, it's great to see you again today. Also, the Utah-Israel Economic Council, Ron Zamir and Tom Jacobson are with us today. And also the Governor's Office of Economic Development and Franz. It's great to see you. And finally, Courtney Ray with the World Trade Center Utah team. Thank you to Courtney. She's been orchestrating all of this, wrangling a lot of cats, as we're grateful for everything that Courtney has done. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first and keynote speaker, Assaf Barnia. And just a quick note, we want to make this interactive. You'll notice that we made this a meeting, so anybody, anytime can turn on their video, turn on their mic, jump in and ask questions. Assaf will give some remarks. We'll have a chance. Courtney will moderate a discussion. We encourage you to ask questions, put questions in the chat function if you don't want to jump on, unmute yourself. After that, we'll hear from the two companies, and then Courtney will moderate a final discussion for the remaining 15 minutes or so. We want to make this interactive. We want to make sure we're talking about the things that are important to you. And so please jump in and participate. I'll go ahead. Assaf's got such a great background. I'll go ahead and read his bio so we all understand how honored we should be to have him with us today. Mr. Assaf Barnia is a seasoned entrepreneur and venture professional with extensive multidisciplinary experience in building innovation platforms and leading commercialization processes in healthcare. He leads Sonara Ventures, a healthcare innovation fund backed by Philips and Teva. In addition to leading Sonara, Mr. Barnia chairs the Life Science Advisory Board at the Israel Export Institute on behalf of the Israeli government, promoting and advancing the export of Israeli technologies in the medical, biotech, pharma, and digital fields in global markets. A valued consultant, Mr. Barnia also advises the World Bank's IFC Venture Capital team and is a co-founder of the IFC's Tech Emerge initiative, a unique acceleration platform that connects healthcare startups from around the world with leading corporations and hospitals in emerging economies. On December 2018, Tech Emerge Health has won the World Bank Group President's Award for Innovation. Formerly, Assaf was one of the founders of CardioSense, a medtech startup company that developed a probe for early shock detection in various medical settings. Before lending his multidisciplinary acumen to Sonara Ventures, Assaf served as CEO of Keynote Ventures, spearheading its acquisition by Hutchison Water in 2012. Prior to this, he headed business development at Mekarot, Israel's national water company, where he oversaw the establishment of WaTech, the Entrepreneurship and Partnership Center for Water Technologies. For his accomplishments at Mekarot and Keynote, he received the Clean Tech Group's Innovation Hero Award in 2013, which recognizes individuals whose commitment, drive, and passion have made a tangible difference for innovation in general and specifically for many startup companies. Previously, Assaf served for 4 years as Director of Business Development at Converse, where he also chaired the Mobile Marketing Association. He's a certified lawyer, and Assaf holds both law degrees and business degrees from the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya, as well as a BA in Political Science and Psychology from Tel Aviv University. So Assaf, you've got great broad experience. We're very grateful to have a chance to hear from you today, and I'll go ahead and turn the time over to you.
Thank you much, Miles, for the intro, and I'm very happy to attend this conference on behalf of the Export Institute. Basically, we're trying to lead the concept of business continuity. Under the COVID-19, obviously, it's becoming a bit hard, but events such as this one, and true appreciation and a big thank you for the efforts to connect us and make sure that we stay connected post that event under the theme of business continuity. I'd like to share with you a presentation. There is, I just hope that everybody can see that. Let me put it on. I hope that you can see the first slide, Israel and the future of digital health. And to walk you through basically some of the highlights that we believe that we have in Israel. But first, let's go a bit to the past. Just making sure that everybody can see that picture of Shimon Peres, our former president. Okay, cool.
Yep.
So one of the quotations that I like the most from Shimon Peres is the fact that the Jews' greatest contribution to history is dissatisfaction. We're always discontent. And I'm not just putting this as a slogan, I'm using that to illustrate why Israelis, as part of their entrepreneurship spirit, never sit down, never see reality or the status quo and accept the status quo as is. That mentality actually has led us to be called the Startup Nation in a very known book that came out like I think over a decade. It was a bestseller for so many years, describing how we came about with Waze that was bought by Google, with Mobileye that was bought by Intel for $15 billion, with the Discon key that everybody is using on this globe that was invented in Israel by a colleague and a friend, Dov Moran, establishing an M system, and then sold it to SanDisk for $1.6 billion. Mazor Robotics, that was sold for $1.6 billion. Neuroderm, the drug delivery for Parkinson, that was sold for $1.1 billion, an incubator company, both of which, by the way, Mazor Robotics and Neuroderm, started as incubator companies with 2 person in a garage in one of those incubators in Israel, and later were sold for over $1 billion. Neuroderm was sold to Mitsubishi Tanabe, as I said, for drug delivery of Parkinson. These are just few examples of exits that came about from the Israeli innovation throughout the years. But also there's a global impact that should be notified, and Israeli companies have boosted New York's economy in that matter, for that case, with nearly $34 billion. So this is just then again to illustrate the impact of innovation being established, and not just within Israel, but rather the impact on some potential collaborations and geographies that we feel that the innovation in various areas, not just necessarily in healthcare, could be driving the economy and boost the economy. What we also have in Israel is a tremendous amounts of multinationals. Over 300 of those are actively searching for innovation in Israel. This is tapping into the Israeli innovation with accelerators, incubators, R&D centers, corporate venture capital teams, and others. This is just a few of those, and if we would like to dive into healthcare, which I'm going to do in a second, there are over 50 of those that are active in Israel: Boston Scientific, Johnson & Johnson, Novartis, Amgen, Takeda from Japan, Pfizer, and definitely a few others. Now, a little bit about the Israeli ecosystem. Unlike the US, which every time that I have a chance to speak about it, I'm amazed by the fact that out of the total GDP within the US, almost 18 or 19% of the GDP is related to health expenditures. And in Israel, we are somewhere normal, if I may say so, between 7 to 8%. We have been able to establish from the 70 years, 72 years of ever since Israel was established, the HMOs, what we call the sick funds in Israel, 4 of which are known as they are giving the community, service to the community, and not necessarily whenever you have something wrong, you are rushing to the hospital, like in some other countries that this is the status. So we have the General Sick Fund, which has about 4.5 million patients. I think it's the second largest HMO after Kaiser Permanente with 12 million patients. Since everything is clusterized in Israel, everything is small and congested and not decentralized. So they are the largest HMO that we have in Israel. We have Maccabi Sick Fund with 2 million patients out of the 9 million patients population, that we have in Israel. This is just to get a sense of where we are. And we are facing the global challenges, regardless to COVID-19, obviously, of a growing population, aging population, unhealthy lifestyles, and so forth. But definitely going back to COVID-19 and what we define, and everybody has been defining now, the new normal. How are we going to go about that new normal? How are we going to translate it into a new delivery of care? It is most definitely a tipping point for telemedicine, and my colleague and friend Alon Natanzot from my home doc will present one of our portfolio companies at Sanara Ventures, which is doing an interesting telemedicine solution, a tipping point for AI, which I'm sure Zach will address that later on, and a tipping point for digital health, generally speaking, under the COVID-19 being such an amazing catalyst. Unfortunate, but this is the situation. And with that, actually, we as a country, we've been pushing digital health, and even though we've been called startup nation, now we are transitioning into a little bit of digital health nation, and I shall share with you why. Probably I should indicate 3 or 4 major reasons. One, from some reasons, from 30 years ago, all of the HMOs and the hospitals were computerized. So now we have, for the last 25 or 30 years, we have electronic medical records, not papers, not forms to fulfill, but computerized data, aggregated data, that basically can serve as a set for analytics and AI and anything that has to do. This is very, very important. Secondly, knowing as a startup nation, we have over 500 startups in digital health. This is an amazing number. I think it's the second largest hub of innovation outside of the US. I would put aside Boston and the Silicon Valley as part of this biotech digital health activity. But probably outside of the US, there's no other place that has such a tremendous amount of startup companies 500, some say 530 of those actively in Israel. And probably to end with one of the verticals that supported is a government decision that was taken some 2 years ago, prioritizing the digital health as the next revenue generator for the state of Israel, with injecting $300 million to support that industry. It may not sound much, but for a small country such as Israel, it is a major contribution. And think about a pilot that needs to be conducted in one of the hospitals, and it may cost like $300,000, and the government comes in and subsidizes about 50%, $150,000 with those funding. So in order to accelerate the time to market and in order to accelerate the adaptation of a new technology being validated in a hospital in Israel, and later on goes to Utah, goes to the Netherlands, or to anywhere else on the planet. This is just a snapshot of the amounts and the verticals within digital health that you can see in Israel, all the way from decision supporting system, remote diagnostics, and revenue cycle, and others. But then again, the deal flow is quite amazing to tap into. Those HMOs have tapped into the Israel innovation, such as the Clalit General Sick Fund and such as Maccabi, with startups. This is like 5-6 years ago, the very early onset of collaboration between those HMOs, sharing data, building up joint solution that were later on becoming gold standards in day-to-day practices within Israel. Zebra is an AI for initially starting with various applications for image analytics, for osteoporosis, and then I think it was the first application that was launched with the General Sick Fund, the Clalit Sick Fund. Maccabi had some collaboration with a startup company called Media Early Sign for the early onset of cancer and detection of cancer. If we look into, and this is my main focus, is really to give credits to some of my friends and colleagues throughout the years. So probably the very first exit that I would say even globally that took place out of Israel in terms of digital health was Allscripts buying DBMotion. Ziv Ofek, who's a very brilliant entrepreneur, set up this company and basically helping to computerize the data system within those hospitals, and later on selling that to Allscripts for that amount. But a few years ago, as a serial entrepreneur, he came up and set up MD Clone. MD Clone is dealing with data security and the confidentiality and the data personalization data that should be kept as a kind of an artificial data with a very unique technology that is now being implemented with hospitals, and eliminating the privacy risks to the extent that it's actually utilizing kind of an artificial profile of users and patients without really exposing the data to the risk involved. So this is another company that he set up. Few more companies that are Duality, for instance, that is active in some of the global markets in terms of cybersecurity and providing various applications. This is Dr. Kira Radinski. She's very known. She had an exit at the age of 26, if I'm not mistaken, and was selling her first company to eBay. But she moved from the high tech into digital health, and now she's running a company which is called Diagnostic Robotics and automation to optimize care and triage of patients within hospitals. They've raised, I don't know, I think about $30 million. Another company on the same area called K Health, which has raised, if I'm not mistaken, now $48 million is now the market valuation, if I'm not mistaken, is already like $400 million. So some of those companies have really gone from early stage two people in a garage, as we say, to become now with a global solution, providing some global solutions to the marketplace. One which I'm very proud of is a company that we have invested in called TaylorMade, with these two entrepreneurs coming to Sanara Ventures some 3 years ago. And we have put the first $1.2 million into that company. And they are addressing what is called financial toxicity. This is a solution, a software-based solution aimed for the US market, and the inability of patients to pay the 20 or 30% out-of-pocket expenses for cancer patient, but not just. It could be any other chronic diseases that patients in the US cannot afford to pay. Unlike in Israel, whereby everything mostly is being covered by the government. Same goes for the UK with the NHS. But in the US, we know that probably 50% of the personal bankruptcy situation are due to medical expenditures. And this solution is actually optimizing the out-of-pocket expenses and come up with a solution to providers that actually lets the provider or lets the patient to find alternative pockets that they can use, and this is a win-win both for the patients as well as for the providers. By the way, just to indicate, it is estimated that the inability of providers of hospitals in the USA to collect the payment after those services that they were provided is estimated to be $5 billion every year. So, and this is only from cancer. So this is our company, TaylorMade. We have brought in 2 other VCs, and now the company is heading towards a major B round with, I think, already like 40 or 50 customers in the US market. Going to telemedicine, a friend and a colleague, Jonathan Adiri, who actually came up, and I really liked the very first time that he told me, you know, when we are doing urine tests, and all of us every now and then we have to go through urine tests, there is what they had defined probably as the walk of shame. You know, we take this plastic bottle and we walk kind of back to the nurse and give it back to the nurse. So they said, we need to say those walk of shames, and we can do those urine tests at home. It actually became to be the very first camera within a smartphone to be approved by the FDA worldwide, globally, out of Israel, as a diagnostic tool to diagnose for the diagnosis of urine tests. And this is a solution that you can buy now today in various countries. If you go on Oxford Street in London or elsewhere, the company have raised $90 million and probably now expanding its activity to Asia and other places with that nice solution in telemedicine. 2 others that I'd like to emphasize, TytoCare, which some of you may have heard, and another company of ours, My Home Doc, which is the company on the right. Tyto is based on a standalone device and costs about $300 in the US. We as Sanara invested in a company, another interesting solution that we feel, My Home Doc, that alone will present a more specific, which is based on the smartphone, and as such, it's leveraging the smartphone capabilities, and this is a reduced price of targeting $100. So we feel that there's a great room for those Israeli companies to play a global game. This is a friend of mine, Avi, who's set up a nuclei for an AI in pathology. The interesting part in that he came up as an officer in the Israeli army, and within the Israeli army, and whether it's satellites or drone, you have to interpret it, various images in some remote areas. So they know how to train system, how to see, very scrutinized way to see. And they've taken that technology for pathology and AI in pathology, doing a very nice work. They just now finalized another round of financing from a pharma company, a European pharma company. And they've taken this technology, obviously, to a civil application and helping people from that case. Day 2 is actually focused, another Israeli company that are focused on microbiome. We now, for the last 5-6 years, know how the microbiome, the germs within our body are so crucial for our health. So they came up with a very interesting solution of data analytics for diabetics and nutrition, everything based on AI and computational. Professor Eran Segal, who came up actually from Stanford University, and now is a professor in the Israeli Weizmann Institution, and Lihi, who is leading the company as a CEO. Johnson & Johnson came in and invested in that company as well. So, and a few other companies, Nutrino, that is also a nutrition company that was acquired by Medtronic, I think a year or 2 years ago. This is a Dr. Gidi Stein, who his entrepreneurship spirit came up from a case that he had read about a child, a 9-year-old child that has taken by mistake the wrong pill and actually passed away. So later on, he set up a company for eliminating prescription errors and saving lives called MedAware. And MedAware is doing that in AI solution to avoid prescription and mistakes within prescriptions. That was adopted by many hospitals in Israel and now being adopted, starting to be adopted also globally. Another company that has been on that area is Medisave. This is a company called Viz. Viz is actually doing an AI for strokes to channel the patients. As we know, in stroke cases, time is brain. The more you spend, unfortunately, in a process being diagnosed, you may lose more of your brain. And this is as much as you can save by an AI technology. So this is exactly what Viz is doing, and is active in the States now, I think, with 300 hospitals. Zebra is doing the same thing for different applications. I've mentioned them, ADOC. Another company out of Sanara, iMedis, which is doing AI for CT scans for early onset of misdiagnosed and incidental findings within CT scans. For instance, we ran a pilot in San Diego with 5,000 patients, notifying that for almost 4% of those patients who went out back home and thinking that everything is okay, unfortunately, due to this AI technology, they had to come back and do another examination. Hopefully, it's not necessarily always cancer, but it's a meaningful findings that needs to be looked at again. So when I'm talking about Israel, we feel that the tremendous amounts of innovation comes out from the on the ground, from the entrepreneurs, from the research institution, but also when I'm active with governments, I'm saying we as governments, we need to innovate as well. And one of the ways that we were lucky to do so, and I'm very happy because I've pushed it and it was something that the government played along with me, that for so many years, the Expert Institute have played a major role in the Medica conference in Germany, which is the largest medical device conference worldwide. We had a national booth there, but 3 years ago, I came up to the board of the Expert Institute and I told them, listen, the largest digital health conference is actually the HIMSS. Let it be in Miami or let it be in Las Vegas, if I'm not mistaken, it's on year by year. So we actually took that initiative and we built as a government a new national booth out of Israel with the chief scientist, the innovation authority, the commercial attaches, myself. We came up to open that 3 years ago, and we're now on a yearly basis for the last 3 years helping companies, helping startup companies to meet you guys, to meet the US market and the global market, and helping them to scale their operation. It takes a lot. I don't know if some of you are maybe too young to recall the Fields of Dreams, but I love the movie and I love the quotation. If we build it, they will come. We need to build a partnership ecosystem that help one another. Specifically now with the COVID-19, knowledge sharing is so important between Israel, US, Singapore, Korea, Thailand. Why, for the sake of that matter, we have been seeing less cases, if at all, in Thailand, a huge country with nearly like 3,000 patients of COVID-19 patients. This has to be tested, whether it has to do with their genomics, whether it has to do with cultural, but this data has to be shared between us as government, between us as entrepreneurs, between us as corporates. So we need to build more and more sharing, knowledge sharing platforms and partnerships, more than we got to do so. Shimon Peres, our president, has said, for me, dreaming is simply being pragmatic. So I hope that I'm not dreaming when I'm asking and I'm calling for the various medical operations within Utah, both investors, providers, and others to come and tap to our operation. And just in a nutshell, who we are, when I'm saying Sanara Ventures, as was presented before, it's like a $60 million fund, a strategic partnership of Philips and Teva, supported by the Israel Innovation Authority. I'm now actually in a process to set up the second fund, the follow-up fund, which is called Sanara Capital, which is a $75 to $100 million fund, which should invest in A-rounds opportunities, post-incubation opportunities that come mainly in digital health and bioconvergence, those very disruptive technologies that combine physics and biology and sometimes computational and engineering. This is where the breakthroughs, the true breakthroughs coming up. So this is a process that we've been doing now, and this is actually my focus. With that, I'm open to questions, and I'll be happy to address any thoughts or questions that you have. Thank you for the time.
Thank you so much, Assaf. That was actually amazing. So we'll get right to the questions. The first one I would say is, obviously, you're a healthcare investor with amazing backers in Philips and Teva. Excuse me. Many of our companies are growth stage companies requiring more capital. We don't have a huge VC community in Utah specializing in healthcare innovation. Do you see opportunities for funding of our growth stage companies with the right partners in Israel? And if so, how do we access those?
There are some, in some cases there could be. I don't want to be too optimistic. I'm trying to be very realistic when addressing that. In some cases, there's some VCs who are looking for disruptive technologies and they are geography agnostic. So they will be willing to invest. An Israeli VC which will invest in a Utah-based company. This is doable, but it has to be truly disruptive technology and with all of those generics considerations that VC look into. In some cases, what we are trying to do, and some VCs have this within their model, is to take a component, disruptive technology, and actually to combine it with an up and running company that may be in a growth stage, but does not have disruptive technology to scale or to take it to the next level and create a true market value. So sometimes those a little bit more unique situation whereby you have an up and running company, growth stage company in Utah, and a combined complementary technology, let it be in cardiology or let it be in oncology or ophthalmology or whatever, and then you combine an up and running platform, let's say with $50, $60 million in sales, with a startup in Israel that is doing a complementary solution to that already up and running platform. And with that, you can create an investment by a VC, by a US VC and an Israel VC, and combine bigger solution that could address the marketplace. So we need to be a little bit more creative in terms of the way that we can potentially not just invest in a remote operation, but rather see the leverage that could be created with a combination of another potentially startup out of Israel that complements to their up and running operation in Utah.
And Courtney, let me just jump in right there, because I think that's a very, very important point. As we look at these types of partnerships and investments across different countries and markets, it's exactly what Assaf just described that makes it so successful, is where there's a joint venture, there's a partnership. It's not just about the capital, because even with COVID right now, you can get capital in a lot of different places, but where a partnership makes sense, then that can become very, very powerful and can accelerate growth and deployment of those technologies in both countries and elsewhere as well. And then also, like I mentioned in the introduction, the Bird Foundation exists to provide grants to exactly those types of joint ventures. And so in addition to making it so it's very more attractive for capital, it helps the technologies, that reinforces them, complements each other. But then there is this, through the Bird Foundation, opportunity for these companies to get some additional support and some grants. They can even make it a sweeter deal and more effective for both the Utah company and the Israeli company.
Yes, thanks, Miles. As our companies look to market their products in Israel, it's important for them to understand the distribution pathways and channels there. How do medical devices or products get distributed in Israel? Is it through the request for tender process or through a different process in Israel?
Well, tender would be definitely part of the way to approach governments and governmental organizations. But in order to do that, first of all, you have to have what is called a local AMAR. This is the name. It's an equivalent to the FDA approval. But typically, whoever gets the FDA, then more easily gets the AMAR, the local regulation for selling medical devices in Israel, called, as I said, called AMAR. But if you have an FDA approval, this should be a no-brainer. But definitely, if there are bids related to government organizations such as the HMOs, which are to some extent controlled, obviously, by the government, some of their operation is semi-private and some is totally governmental, the hospitals which they own. This is the main activity in Israel, I would say. I'm not sure about the percentages, but related somehow to the government or semi-governmental operations. So bid would be definitely a place to start, but also piloting and validating those technologies in advance in one of the hospitals and then scaling that up to other places.
So similar to that, I mean, as you know, in the United States, it's very hard to do clinical trials, and other countries often like our companies to work with their hospital patients for clinical trials and may want to work together while doing that. Is that something that Israel encourages? And if so, are the clinical trials conducted in Israel recognized by the FDA in the USA?
Well, we are, in some cases, you may have some portion if you do a pre-submission to the FDA and they guide you. In some cases, it has to be a certified laboratory that the FDA recognizes. We even see that some of our startups are going and running their FDA studies in other places, some of which are in Israel with the approval of the local hospitals, and some of which, one of our companies, we just did a clinical study now for the FDA in San Francisco just like a month ago. So the FDA, is, by all means, is the leading organization, and even if we have some discussions in India with some of our companies and others, they all want to see the FDA first, and then the local in China, the CFDA, and whatever in Japan, local regulation that is going through. In Israel, typically most of those Israelis are going through an FDA approval as a first stage, and then the CE as a second. More and more the last 10 years, they are also approaching the Asian markets as well. But the FDA is like, I would say, the go-to, initial go-to, not even the necessary local AMAR approval, because eventually we have a small country with 9 million patients, And Israeli entrepreneurs do not foresee that as a true market, but rather as a better site, as a validation platform in Israel, and later on, obviously, to expand to the global market.
Great, thank you. We'll have one more question before we go to our two companies presenting. One of our participants asked, one of the challenges to developing AI in the United States is balkanization of healthcare data due to PHI laws. Is this a barrier in Israel as well?
This is in process whether the data belong. You know, there was a discussion now. I just had a discussion with one of the board members of the Haklalitzik Fund and the others. It's at the end of the day, the data belongs to patients, but eventually, practically and pragmatically, it's not necessarily always the case. And there's always a proof that there's some complexities which are related to the data. We do see more and more collaboration between hospitals, HMOs, and sharing the data and diving into joint collaboration. In some cases, it may be resulting with royalty-based payments to this joint research, joint development, utilizing the data from an HMO or a hospital or a provider, and that. But eventually, those companies that develop technologies in Israel, which obviously looking into the global market, and they are looking into HIPAA compliance. They're looking for the US regulation in order to set the gold standard for their development. So most of the companies in Israel, if they are related to data and data security, they will be HIPAA compliance and following the sets of rules which the US is presenting. And the local ones in Israel are to be followed. We're trying to open up more and more the possibility of do more and more with the data, but eventually it comes down to the specific organization that manage that.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, so now we're lucky enough to hear from two companies that are great examples of what can be done in this space. They're each going to speak for 5 minutes back to back. The first person we'll hear from is Zach Aaron from AI Health. And AI Health is a digital health company that aims to enable automated AI-based diagnostic screening solutions for retinal imaging. Then we'll go right into Alon Natanson, is the director of My Home Doc. It's a digital health company that has developed a system that supports a full remote clinical exam, enabling diagnosis and treatment in the first encounter and allowing consumers to access care where and when they need it. My Home Doc connects clinicians and patients via a handheld device. So go ahead, Zach, we'll go right to you.
All right. It's okay. Hi, can you hear us okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much to all of you for your time today. Thank you for having us, and it's great to present. And thanks Assaf for the great overview of the Israeli digital health market. It was great. So we're going to talk about our company, AI Health. I'm Zach Aaron, and I'm the CEO of the company. Our target is to prevent blindness. We do this with AI and telemedicine. As you know, the eye retina is an amazing diagnostic tool. It's the only place in the body you can see blood vessels and nerve systems, so it allows us to find problems that cause blindness, as well as systemic problems, from hypertension to cardiovascular issues to dementia. So it really is an amazing diagnostic tool. And specifically, when we talk about problems that cause blindness, then we have actually over 1 billion people in the world that need to be tested every year. In the US, we have also more than 75 million people. In particular, we have diabetic that need to be tested every year, and people that starting the age of 65, you need to be tested as well, if it's for diabetic retinopathy, glaucoma, AMD. And the tragedy is that most people, because of the accessibility to the ophthalmologist, don't follow through, don't really do the screening every year as they should. The current standard of care is really inefficient. People go to their primary care physician, and then they get this referral to the ophthalmologist, and most people don't go. So the vast majority, over 80% of the people with actual problems remain undiagnosed, and at some point they develop sight-threatening problems and get blind. And with our solution, the idea is to screen people everywhere, so it can be within the primary care office, or the endocrinologist setting, or at their retail pharma, the CVS store, and then you can screen everyone. And now there is also a new CPT code for this test being done using AI, so it's quite amazing, and everyone is happy from making this process much more efficient. Our technology is able to do so with small portable handheld devices, and in the future smartphones as well. So this is a great solution that allows you to get immediate instant report whether you need to see the ophthalmologist or not. So that's in short what we do. We've built a strong team with many years of experience. Myself, Danny, who is my co-founder, we are serial successful entrepreneurs. We have a board with seasoned successful entrepreneurs and investors as well, and a strong medical board. Most important, we've built an A-team of stars in artificial intelligence. Right now, our go-to-market is focused on bundles, which means selling our AI already bundled within handheld cameras. And that's sold in a subscription service. But we also plan to sell later on licenses and system for large hospitals. And I think you mentioned the BIRD grant, the BIRD Foundation before. We received a grant just shy of $1 million to develop that product. Our company is today focused on a number of verticals, camera manufacturers to integrate our AI with. We already have a strategic partner in that space, and also pharma companies where we can contribute not just to screening, but also to help their R&D processes, as well as close work with healthcare providers. So that's in short an overview of our company.
Thank you so much. So we really appreciate that. What a fascinating company. And by the way, our participants have been nice enough to say that if you're interested in communicating with them in the future, we'll send their email and you can talk to them. Oops, someone's chatting. I think we need to. Okay, so they will be happy to share their slides if you contact them directly in the future. All right, let's move on, please. Go ahead, Alon, and you want to share yours on My Home Doc?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you hear me well?
Yes.
Wonderful. So, hi everyone. My name is Alon Nathanson. I'm My Home Doc CEO. And I would like to thank you all for having me here, and thank you for the opportunity to share with you today the story of My Home Doc. Okay. My Home Doc is a privately held digital startup company. The My Home Doc product enables you to conduct remote patient monitoring and diagnosis. It is a handheld device that is attached to your smartphone, enabling you to be interviewed, examined, and diagnosed on and offline from the comfort of your home, either during the day or in the middle of the night. Here you can see the picture of the device. The device contains 4 sensors. I will try to mark it for you. One sensor is the stethoscope, enabled to listen to the sounds of your heart, lungs, and abdomen. The second sensor is the otoscope for ear exam, the thermometer for body temperature, and the pulse oximeter to measure saturation and heart rate. And in addition to the 4 sensors, the device is utilizing the smartphone camera that enables you to take pictures of your skin, mouth, and throat. To summarize, the device includes 4 sensors and a camera, providing 9 physical exams, and the most common in primary care. With My Home Doc solution, you get the mobile app, which is a self-explanatory and easy to use. The My Home Doc device, which you mount on your smartphone device. like this, and the cloud where the data is loaded. The solution is operated in two modes, the synchronous mode and the asynchronous mode. In the asynchronous modes, you record, store, and forward the data to the healthcare practitioner and wait for his/her clinical guidelines. In the synchronous mode, you interact with the healthcare practitioner in real time. The MyHomeDoc device main advantages are the ease of use, seamless integration, which is based on the open software architecture to integrate with. It is compatible with all common iOS, Apple smartphone, and Android. The device utilizes the smartphone camera connectivity, and therefore it is very cost effective. Here you can see our near future product roadmap. The product development for the future is outlined in the following way. The product roadmap includes additional clinical exams based on additional sensor that we are planning to further develop for blood pressure, ECG, and measuring mental stress. Later on, of course, we are planning to far more expand it. In addition, we plan to leverage to expand the value on the data side, applying data analysis and artificial intelligence. It will enable better patient triage and improving population management. For example, by the ability to identify potential pandemic outbreak, even patient diagnostics based on our ongoing growing database with clinical sounds and visuals. Currently, the sounds include heart, lung, and abdomen, and the visual includes ear canal, skin, mouth, and throat. Our business model is flexible, giving us the ability to work with different customers with different characteristics and needs. In general, it can be as a capital sale, selling the device, subscription, fee per use with or without combination of a license, and a PaaS model, which is a platform as a service, hardware and software. Without diving too deeply into comparative analysis, I would summarize our comparative status as follows. MyHomeDoc device offers at least the same clinical added value and quality for much less cost, and presenting far more flexible business model and software architecture to integrate with. The company roadmap is as visualized here at the slide, but I would like to start with a very fresh update as of yesterday, which we achieved important milestone. We gained approval from the Israeli Minister of Health, the Amar, as was mentioned before by Assaf, to sell and market the product in Israel. We are in a very final stage right now, preparing submission for both 510K clearance from the FDA and CE mark for Europe. We anticipate to gain the FDA clearance towards the end of the year and the CE mark by Q1 2021. We are now producing several hundreds of units of our beta version while initiating our work on scaling up to mass production. The initial production will allow us to initiate initial sales already in Q4 this year, and the mass production will allow us to start broader commercial activity by Q1 2021. And now we are open for any questions, should you have any.
Thank you so much, Alon. That's really exciting. Both of you have incredible companies, and we look forward to potentially being able to use those. That's really exciting. Thank you. For both of you, well, we have you close by. You've both been very successful, and what advice would you give our companies on the phone if they're interested in partnering with Israeli companies or growing in Israel? What advice would you give them as they look towards the Israeli market?
Zach?
Well, I think Israeli companies in the end are very much focused on the U.S. market. I think the vast majority. I think, as Assaf mentioned, Israeli companies usually strive to have the first sales in the U.S. First, they go and try and get FDA clearance. So I think, and especially we see this now, you know, in this time of COVID-19, when things become very much virtual, then the geographical gaps suddenly evaporate, and I think it's very easy to reach out to Israeli companies and the opposite. And we've experienced, you know, great business achievements during the recent month, and of course before that. So I think it's about hard work and reaching out and getting to the right people, especially using this kind of platform and conferences. And I'll use the opportunity again to thank all of you for your time and having us.
I will add to it that I think where the synergy is, Israel, as was very well described by Assaf, is very strong in innovation, technology, and science in general. So we are very much technology science oriented. And I think that if there is any company in the US that can synergistically or has any idea about potential within the US market, the synergy can be where a strong marketeer can engage together with a strong technology, scientific-oriented company, or even if you have a great idea and you are looking for a strong R&D team, it's almost like a mind here, and you can do almost any kind of mining within the Israeli technology and potential innovation. So the synergy can be good, strong sales and marketing BD company with a strong technology R&D center in Israel. Almost, I think, a secure synergy is embedded there.
And just to strengthen on what you just said, in our case, we have our headquarters and business center in New York City, and most of the company, the R&D center, is located in Israel. And it sounds like a winning formula to have the R&D in Israel, especially in the AI space, and then to have the right business office in the States.
Great.
Yep.
We have a few questions that have come in. One said, what will be the main challenge to combine the standards of FDA, CFDA, and CE into one unified standard for medical supplies?
What would be the main challenge to combine?
Yeah, what will be the main challenge to combine all standards, FDA, CFDA, and CE into one unified standard for medical supplies? I don't totally understand that, but you guys
I
might.
think if I may, this is a bit of maybe a dream to see that, but it's not as pragmatic. I think each and every region, the US, Europe, and definitely China, and specifically now with the bit of attention that resides between those nations, it will be hard to combine that to a one unified regulation path. Maybe it would be our dream as entrepreneurs, but would be definitely a major challenge by politicians and for good enough reasons. I think that each of those legislations and regulations paths were defined carefully with the history and the local development of each of those geographies, and they have their own considerations. For instance, we are now approaching, with my home doc, for instance, Alon and I approaching now the Japanese market. You know, the regulation there is so much different. For instance, up till, I don't know, a few months ago, you were not allowed to have any, to prescribe any subscription without seeing a physician. So over a telemedicine code, this would not fly. Now the COVID-19 has come up and changed everything. So maybe under the COVID-19, as I was proposing, we shall see more and more collaborations, but to have a one unified regulation path and a global one, I think this is a precedent that for the future to come, for the near future to come, I think it's not real.
I will add to it. I would like to add from the, from the industry perspective, not as a regulator, of course, but we as a company, obviously, it's a great challenge for us facing the different regulatory requirements. So I think that from a strategy point of view, what we are trying to do, we are bringing our regulatory experts, the one that experts in the EU, the one that experts in the FDA, China and any other country or regional territory. And we are trying to define what is the common ground and build almost kind of a regulatory strategy. And from the very beginning, trying to build a modular approach that every step that we are doing will serve as many regulatory requirements as possible. So we will not be able, so we will not be enforced later on to run additional clinical study for a specific territory, but from the very beginning to be aware what are the requirements, let's say, of China, Europe, US, if Asia Pacific, in addition to China, is on the target, including Japan, South Korea, and from the very beginning trying to build the necessary requirements that will serve all of them or most of them, rather than every time to face new requirements and to start some specific process specifically for a specific regulatory authority.
That makes sense. So one more question, because we have to wrap up. Assaf, I wanted to ask you, one of our participants has asked, how has COVID changed your sales model for the US, and what channels are you planning to use?
Well, as Sanara Ventures, as a venture capital, where we have a portfolio of companies, and each of those relevant portfolio companies that are now addressing the US market has their own either broadening their offering or being more targeted to a specific situation. In some cases, some of our companies were trying to really focus on COVID-19 related solutions. Others, such as one that I may have presented, which is doing the financial toxicity, financial navigation, tailor-made, is actually expanding its offering, not just to providers, not just to hospitals anymore, but rather approaching now the payers, the employers, pharmacists, and obviously also pharma companies. So I think this industry, in that sense, you need to rock the boat every now and then in a proactive way and think what we should be doing as a startup company in order to address the low-hanging fruits on one side, but those with the greatest benefits, not in the long term, but rather in a short to mid-term. And this is a consideration. There's ups and downs to that, but sometimes it's broadening your offering in those crises. And sometimes it's actually being more focused on a specific solution that may be only tailored to a COVID-19 solution and not to other that you may have in mind, cardiology, oncology, who knows. So it's on a case by case. I don't think there's a generic answer to that.
Great. Thank you all so much for your time. Miles, go ahead and wrap us up here.
Okay, great. Thank you, Courtney, for moderating that discussion. And thank you, Assaf, Alon, Zach. It's been phenomenal. Very, very good insights into what's working well in Israel. And I think lessons that our companies can learn about what we could be doing better here. We're working very hard as a state, at the governor level, the state level, Salt Lake City, and others in industry to figure out how can we provide more leadership and help take our healthcare innovation industry to another level. That's something that Israel clearly has done. So lessons learned for us here, kind of a big picture strategy, but then specifically for individual companies, we do these things to help prompt positive action that otherwise wouldn't have happened. So please think about what we've talked about today. If there are any opportunities, you're looking for joint ventures or partnership opportunities in Israel, please reach out, let us know. We want to be a resource. We have grants and services that we can provide for free to help you take advantage of these opportunities. And if nothing else, now you know more about two great Israeli companies, and Assaf in everything that he's doing, from investments to helping shape Israel's exports, is offered to be a partner to us moving forward. So I hope everybody has a good day. Thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to working with you to follow up.